So I'll introduce our next moderator is James Bishop, who co-leads the group here at IDA that does data analytics that sponsored this event and put it together. James is an economist, so I like him anyway, even though he's not an OR guy. And I discovered another feature about James I hadn't really thought of before, and that's that his name is a lot easier to spell than mine, and that's why his name was put up as jbishop@ida.org if you guys have feedback, or of course you can respond to me. But James, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brian, for destroying my inbox.
You're welcome.
Now, you may view the most previous panel as a hard act to follow, but I'm going to be an optimist like Laura and view it as a marvelous opener for our final panel, featuring our esteemed panelists, who I will introduce and get out of the way to let them share their knowledge with you. So, directly to my left, we have Lieutenant Colonel Kristin Saling, who is the Chief Analytics Officer at the Army Talent Management Task Force, providing detailed analysis and advice to senior Army leaders in the fields of people analytics and artificial intelligence, and building workforce management tools for the future. She also does research in industrial engineering, computing and social science, arts and humanities, and computer and society. She holds graduate degrees in engineering management and systems engineering from the Missouri University of Science and Technology and the University of Virginia, respectively, and an undergraduate degree in operations research from the United States Military Academy. We also have, to her left, Evelyn Yee, Senior Data Advisor in the Office of the Chief Human Capital Officer at the United States Department of Homeland Security. And in this role, Evelyn works on projects that use data to tell a story about the DHS workforce. And I will ask about that. Prior to her tenure at DHS, Evelyn was a management consultant in the Organization and Strategy Practice Group at Booz Allen Hamilton. A hybrid golden bear and maroon, Evelyn holds undergraduate and graduate degrees in economics and public policy from UC Berkeley and an MBA from the University of Chicago. So I want to start off this panel with a question for both of our panelists. We heard a term in the last panel from Greg. He said, data literacy. I want to know what that means to our panelists. What does it mean to you, Chris?
Okay, that's a good one, because it's one of the things we're always telling. In order to become a more data-driven organization, it's what we need. We need more data literacy or data fluency. Of course, it helps. We can also tell senior leaders what they need to do or what that actually means to achieve it. Easy version is it's the ability to speak, read, and write data. But again, what does that mean? The way we're defining it, at least in my organization, is it's a certain level of capability of talking about where the data comes from, understanding the processes, the analytics that are used to create the end states that we're looking for, a basic understanding of the techniques. You don't want them to be statistical experts. They don't understand. They don't necessarily have to build a stochastic model, but they probably need to know what one is and maybe some of the basic parameters that go into it. And more importantly, you want them to know the use cases and the applications, be able to talk about the resulting value of these different, of the data and the techniques for creating your analytics. So as far as we go for data literacy, it's the more we can let the data and the analytics speak for themselves, the more numbers and charts we can start providing people with so that they get the nuances of the work that's been done, less just simple bullet summaries, and get them working with trends, with actual products, so that they can understand how those things have been created to work toward their resulting value.
Thanks, James. Thanks again for the invitation to be here. So for us at Homeland Security at the headquarters level, I think for us in the data analytics group, actually, so we have varying, or at least I think there are different varying definitions of data literacy. So for us who are in the data analytics group, data literacy is being able to look at the data, be able to clean the data, be able to provide the data, do an analysis on the data, and ship it up and out. I think for me and for us realizing what data literacy is actually for the decision makers, the stakeholders who we provide the data to, for us like to be the Deputy Undersecretary for Management, our Chief Human Capital Officer, as well as the acting S1, the Secretary of Homeland Security. And for them, we can't, or, force what we think the definition of data literacy is on them, and that they need to understand the data, they need to think, for them to be data literate, in our mind, is so that they can see the data, see what the importance of that piece of information, and be able to use that and make a decision affecting policy, affecting the workforce, affecting all the operations that we do as Homeland Security.
Wow, thank you. So to help make that happen, you have some responsibility to tell the story to decision makers, right? So could you give me an example of what that looks like as a success?
Okay. I think, just as Greg was talking about before, we have to show cases where the analytics have provided value to get people more interested in how these processes are working toward the business goals. We kind of try a two-pronged approach. One is developing the business goals for analytics, and the other is developing the understanding and the backbone of the data and the analytics workforce to get there. So we're trying to help those two things meet in the middle. The more we can show value on either end, the more we start seeing these things talked about and integrated. I think the best thing that has happened to us is we've gotten a lot of these success stories in front of the Chief of Staff of the Army, in front of a number of other different senior leaders, and having a champion to push this, to sponsor it, to publicly go in and critique the analysis, to critique the data, to push for more detailed analysis, and to speak about data quality has been huge. I mean, having somebody in your organization who speaks to leadership with some measurement of authority, not necessarily as the analyst, but who can come through and be your champion, is an incredible asset.
Evelyn, how do you tell a story with data?
Well, lately for us, so the data analytics group, at least at the headquarters level at Homeland Security, has been around for about 5 years. And realizing that a lot of times before, and DHS at that point, DHS now is maybe 18 years old, no, excuse me, 15 years old, I think 15 or 16 years old. So we're a very active teenager. And so, the data analytics group within the headquarters level has been more, it's around 5 years. And so a lot of the reports and a lot of the products that we've done before have been in response to data requests. We have the secretary, the senior leaders would want information. So we don't necessarily have we haven't had the luxury of being able to tell longitudinal studies, look at the data, or have a hypothesis and ask the data our hypothesis and help us solve the information. So I can think of one specific example I think that's been positive for us telling a story. So we've moved to also telling story. Data visualization is big. You use Tableau, you use like business analytics. But so we have something that's like the secretary's placemat, which is like on a placemat, all the data across all their different operations and missions, and has key information like our retention, our attrition rates, our fill rates for priority mission critical occupations, and our diversity numbers, as an example. So from that, the secretary and our undersecretary for management have been excited about seeing that because it's very clear and concise. They can see it on their smartphones, which is really important, right before, let's say, they go in front of the cameras and talk. So from that, telling the story now, maybe have a little bit more luxury of time, or I've been told that this is something I'm going to start working on that has a little bit more time horizon. It's basically the question we're going to ask is, are our retention strategies working? Retention strategies will be relocation, recruitment, retention, and payments to folks in our mission critical occupations that have high attrition rates. So that's our hypothesis now, and this project which got just approved last week, is basically looking at that hypothesis, going back into all the data that we have, our financial data, our personnel payroll data, and actually asking that data, does it tell us a story, rather than looking at the data and then telling a story from it.
That sounds like a fascinating kind of project to work on.
Yeah, it will be. Luckily, we have a lot more. We have support that with this, it's not going to be like a week turnaround time, because as those with data, there's a lot of cleaning up, there's a lot of questions to ask, and then so luckily we have a little bit more luxury of time, hopefully.
So I think Shelley asked an excellent question, so much so that I'm going to steal it here. And it still relates to your response, which is how do you enable your team to perform that research, whether it's software or hardware or human capital or administrative or something else?
So we've, just across the G1 analysts to begin with, we've broken down different capacity or different capabilities, core competencies that I think we want to look for in anybody who works with data. So we've got the folks who can get in there, who can run their SQL queries and who can reach into the database and pull everything and start building different tables and then start doing the advanced analysis on it. But then we've also got a number of other different adjacent competencies. We are looking for data strategists who look at not just the data management plan and the data strategies that we produce, which basically talk about building a data lake, or we look at it as kind of a data swamp that everybody can reach into and play in. But what are we going to do with this? So what are we going to do this? What are we going to answer as far as our questions in the long term? So we need people thinking about that strategically. We need people to be essentially analytics translators. That's kind of the buzzword du jour. It's the hot job if you look at Indeed and LinkedIn. But you need people with the capability to bridge the data literacy gap until we get more robust plans to get people up and running on data. To take the information, to take the in-depth analysis and be able to break it down into how it fits into the workplace goals, how it is value added to the organization. So they need to have an equal level of competence in the analytics side and in the business process side, because they also need to be able to take the requirements of those business process goals and turn them into, here's the requirements for the analysis. You guys build this system now, and we'll see how this works. How we build that is a combination of, and that's one of the things that we like to tell at management, because we're trying to teach the Army to look at our force not in aggregate, not in big categories, but as individuals. So we want to be able to look at the competencies that we have that we can use to upskill an analytics workforce and then figure out the gaps with new emerging requirements and see where we need to make our new hires. I think one of the biggest obstacles that we have right now is a lot of people think that the capabilities we need are totally resident outside the workforce. We listen to a lot of contractors who come in and try and say, here, we're going to build this thing for you, and we're going to sprinkle a little AI fairy dust on it, and we're going to solve all your problems, without sitting there saying, you know, we've got a lot of people with very, very strong statistical backgrounds. I mean, and there are a lot of them who are self-upskilling. I'm an operations research analyst by trade, and we have a bunch of different continuing education programs going on where we can learn more of these procedures and take our stochastic models, upskill them to the level where we're using big data and we're doing some of this analytics. So we need to look at how we are building those folks and take advantage of them before we just start saying, hey, we're going to go buy a whole bunch of new stuff. So, and that goes also to reaching out to our sister services, to shared services, to FFRDCs, and to our existing partners, and seeing where we can capitalize on relationships we already have built rather than just going and buying the next shiny object.
So Evelyn, how do you enable your team to do the research you need to do, whether it's their human capital, where it's what tools they're using, and how they communicate?
So I think right now, first, I think with the teams, we have some reporting folks who just know the data and be able to pull the data out of all of our databases and our systems. And then we have the analytics folks. And so I think for how we motivate more so is like interest and commitment to that. I think you can put people in training and say, this is what we're going to do, please learn it. But I think for us, we really try to get the folks who are the most interested on our team, because, and I'll say this, because sometimes, you know, you have people, their training hours we all have to do. And then we say, okay, this is training, let me just dump it on you. You get to training, you get your points. Okay, we're done. But for us, we've really been trying to focus on the folks on our team who are really interested. And there are a couple of folks on our reporting team that's interested. They want to be able, they've been taking some stretch goals. Like we have like, you know, write the summary of what this data says, so that what's going to go on our products that go up to senior management. Okay, and if you can do that and you have the interest, then we'll give you a little bit more training and so forth. And then for those of us who work on the analytics side, it's more so, okay, now since you know this, maybe because we rely on the people getting us the data. If you want, for me, my stretch goal is now the other way is to learn SQL. Or SQL or some other things. I'm not as incented, but I know that it's something that I need to do. So for us, we look across our enterprise and see if there's an interest for us.
Now, I won't forget, this forum is about usable information. So before I ask about usable information, I want to ask you what that means to you. Give me a definition. I don't think we've had one yet of usable information.
I think just from the data perspective, you're looking for usable information, you want a certain level of accuracy, consistency, completeness, timeliness, and I know there's a formal definition. There's another piece in that. I think uniqueness is another one. And we spend 90% of our time trying to get our data that's sitting in this muddy data swamp to some level of completeness, to some level of usable information. We also have to look at what the gaps are in the information that we have and see where we need to run experiments and collect more data. So, yeah, I think that's, well, there's two pieces of it. One of it, the quality of the data, but there's a second aspect to it in the business process. It's the accuracy and the completeness and the quality of the data compared to what. I think sometimes we forget it. We forget what are we actually trying to do with this stuff. So we have to look at it in relation to what the business goal is we're trying to support.
Evelyn, do you have a definition for usable information?
Yes, so for us, again, we go back to what our stakeholders, who are audience, are the users of our data, which is like the Undersecretary of Management, the acting S1, and it changes based on the person, based on the leadership. So useful information for the previous leadership was more because they came from a more finance background, and it was we had, for example, a priority mission critical occupation charts, deliverables. I just want to give very specific examples of what's useful information for different people. So and it was probably 20 pages of a slide deck that talked about priority mission critical occupations, what's the attrition rate, what's the fill rate, what's the time to hire, all that, and it was just in-depth analysis of each one. And we had a few bullet points, and the senior leaders combed over that, and they were able to use it because they were happy to digest that kind of information when they would, let's say, go up to the Hill. For our new leadership now, they all come from more operations within our components, and so folks who come from operations, their useful information is not the 20 pages of slides where you go into the minutia. They want the bottom line. For example, now we're changing that priority mission critical occupation from 20 pages to about 5 or 9, and I have a feeling it's probably going to go down to 3. Not to say that the information is not important. That's why we have appendices. But now now they care about this, so what does this help with our mission? And right now, and sometimes because Homeland Security has been in the news so much, there's certain focus of our mission comes onto the front pages. And so we have to make sure that our information is useful so that our leadership can use that, right, look on their phones right before they go into, again, a meeting with the media, a meeting with the Hill. So that for them is useful information. So because that's useful information to them, we have to understand that's the information that they want. And then now we have to start thinking, from all the data that we have, what might be the next set of useful information data points that they might need?
So I've set you up, or as Tom might say, teed you up, because I have this idea in my head that I want you to comment on. You've described what is data literacy, you described how you would enable your team, and we can have this vision of a project that's going to work out just fine. The person you're going to produce usable information for, they are data literate. You're confident being able to present to them. You have a team that has all of the skills and the equipment and tools necessary. You have a well-defined research question. You have data. What are the pitfalls? How can it go wrong? Or have I painted too rosy a picture?
I'm trying to find the holes in there. There's any number of different things we can do. Because at the time the data was asked for, the data could have been perfect, the model could have been perfect, and then somebody's made a policy change and said, we no longer care about this thing. We actually want to look for these, and the model you have spent this amount of time creating is now out of date. So that's one of the reasons everybody's talked about agile development. I really like agile just because you are turning continuous deliverables to a stakeholder, and they are able to see value in your work at a more rapid pace because you're giving them essentially just a series of IPRs with little tidbits, little deliverables, and they're not waiting for some massive study that I think a lot of senior leaders have unfortunately become jaded against, as we very much realize there's a need to take the time to delve into some of these different problems. But if we can kind of keep providing them the rapid tidbits, we can at least get some course correction when there is a big policy decision. I mean, we've talked about it from the budgeting side continuously, and we know, in a couple of years, there's going to be some degree of administration change, whether it's huge, whether it's small, but there are going to be different people making different decisions and putting different priorities ahead of things. I mean, just having new chief of staff for the Army changes our prioritization considerably. So I think that's, even in a mathematically perfect world, you still have the human factor to take into account.
Thanks, Chris.
For us, I think the pitfalls, as Chris had mentioned, for us, the pitfalls of research and data is timeline, time horizon. There, I think maybe because maybe we're guilty because of our own success. Because we're used to providing the data really fast and are used to seeing it, I think folks, our leadership is used to being able for us to write reports real soon. Think like, for example, this retention, the benefits, and are retention strategies helpful? It's been told that we have the luxury of at least a couple of months to do that, and for those in more research-oriented, that's maybe not a lot of time. For us, that's like, dog years, 2 months. But so a potential pitfall is after I start diving into data, we start looking into that, it's going to be a change. You're like, tell us the answer, we want to know now. Because somehow maybe something might get wind, before the report is written and conclusions are, it might be something that, okay, well then we're going to implement this. If you think we're thinking the trajectory is that it's positive, it's working, this is how we think it's working, besides anecdotal stories, then it'll be like, okay, then we're going to use retention strategies, and it gets bubbled up, and then that research becomes policy, and then people are going to want success. And so I think that's the pitfall, knowing that this is a research question right now that we're asking. We don't know exactly what the answer is going to be.
Wow, thank you.
Can I do
Please,
a quick piggyback off that? Evelyn brought up a great point. I don't think a lot of senior leaders understand the difference between us just going in with a SQL query and building a table out of data and what needs in-depth analysis, what we don't already have existing metrics for, and what we have to design an experiment to go out and collect. So that piece can be a significant pitfall.
I thought I asked a hard question, but you made it look easy, and I hope and expect, for all of you out there who are managing programs, maybe budding data analyses, and are optimists like Laura, that can be some forewarning or at least some advice. And I mean only to ask one more question before we give you guys a chance. I've been hogging them all after all. So I'll try to make it an even harder one, because predicting is hard, especially about the future. So what is the future of data analysis, particularly to produce usable information, whether it be in terms of tools or the way you do that research in terms of timelines or the type of teams you have to build to do so?
Let's see. I think our future, we're relying on the kind of the incredibly sexy analytic topics in discussion, when I think our organizations are going to be moved along to data literacy and to more routine use of data with the stuff that's really not as sexy. It's looking for the slow processes and the piles of paper and introducing robotic process automation to make those things more efficient. It's introducing a very relatable, small-level tool to make people's lives a little bit easier that they may not even notice they're using. I mean, some of these things come in like big leaps, like, you know, you got Siri, you got your Google Assistant, you got your Alexa at home. They now keep your grocery list for you, so they're not necessarily doing anything too fancy, but, you know, they're turning a light on. They're keeping a grocery list. They're setting some reminders so you don't forget things. And they're not going out and solving the humongous problems of the world, but they're cleaning up all the other little stuff out there so that you can make those big leap forward. I think the future, as we go forward, is figuring out the best way to do human-machine teaming and letting the automation take over where we have those boring monitoring processes so that we can broaden our time to study in depth the big problems and getting everybody to a point where we kind of see value in both of those things.
Thanks. For us, I think the future with that will be not so much the technology, because it will be there and gathering the data or analyzing the data. For us, I think the challenges will be is the stories that we're going to tell from that. So for example, we see some in the workforce now, we might be using more, for example, especially on Customs and Border Protection's mission is securing the border. And so now we'll start using maybe more technology, more maybe drones, maybe artificial intelligence and so forth. But pretty soon, then they're going to start wanting, meaning our external stakeholders, those on the Hill and those on the Hill and the public will start asking for how useful is that? How useful are the technologies that you guys are using to complete your mission? And I think what's going to be our challenge is are we collecting information on the use of the new technologies to carry our mission? And I can see that sometimes in using the new technologies, we might be a few steps behind in making sure that data is collected at those points rather than trying to figure out how we're going to collect the data once the project and the program has been carried, it has been actually going on for a little bit. So I think that's going to be our problem, capturing data of new technologies that are used in carrying out our mission.
Thank you so much. My only regret is that our speakers have said too many things that are interesting to ask about, but I'll at least give the audience a chance to ask a few questions. Any takers? Mike, you're very eager today. I'll reward that behavior.
Colonel Saling, are you going to go back and tell the G1 we have to get our Army personnel and Army talent management data into the Havana data lake right away? And why or why not? How do you think about that? And same thing for you, Ms. Yee, is this question of, so if there's going to be a DHS, personnel data lake, how do you think about the value proposition for your mission of getting your data into some larger aggregation of data across the department?
So personally, I believe in data sharing. It's enterprise-level data. It's an enterprise-level analytics effort. Yes, I believe we should be doing that. But the hard part is making all the use case arguments with senior leaders and saying, here's why, here's the outcomes, here's the benefits. Previously, in order to get all the G1's information into our pre-existing data lake with the PDE, the Person Event Data Environment that the Research Facilitation Lab in Monterey houses for us, we had to sign the G1 Omnibus Agreement and basically tell everybody that you're in the G1, all the data in the G1 belongs to the G1, thou shalt. So we're actually looking at that and seeing, okay, how do we do this for the Army? We have to look at what's going to be combined. Should it all be combined? We're seeing a certain amount of that being done with Army Leader Dashboard, with Palantir combining both personnel data and readiness data and a bunch of other different pieces to create full readiness dashboards. But then, I mean, it's just a question of the use cases, drawing out, here's what you can see from it, here's what we can do with it to be able to get it all pulled together. The problem with pooling all of the data, I think, is just maintaining some level of provenance of the data. As data gets transferred from system to system, as we consolidate systems, we lose data dictionaries, we lose where this came from, we lose why it was collected, we lose the policies that were in place in the time, we lose a lot of that information. So I think the only caveat I would have for us taking part in that, that overall process is just making sure that we maintain some level of provenance and use agreements as we go forward.
Absolutely. I think it's great to be able to share information across departments in the federal government. So, for example, DHS is about roughly 70% law enforcement. We'll have the Customs and Border Protection agents, we have the Secret Service special agents, we have even at TSA, we have the criminal investigators, we also have some of their TSOs, Transportation Security Officers, which is quasi-law enforcement. So there are other federal agencies, such as the U.S. Department of Justice, Bureau of Prisons, we have the Air Marshal, the Marshal Service, and so forth. So the issues that we have in our workforce, such as retention, recruitment, attrition, I think would be better understood if we looked across some of our similar law enforcement agencies. This is just an example of something how we're wrestling if we could share information. So there's exactly something that's called FedScope that is there, that sometimes we go to try to get information about other law enforcement agencies. As you can probably assume, because of its law enforcement, a lot of it is personal identifiable information or also things that you might not necessarily want to share. So I think, it's not, you would like to share, but you necessarily just kind of because of the PII. Think that we just have to maybe look into different ways, and that's what some of these interagency groups are forming to start talking about that. Because yes, while DHS's missions might be different than, let's say, the Drug Enforcement Agency's mission or the Bureau of Prisons mission, at the core, it's a law enforcement agency. So there are similarities across that. So if we could have all this information, then we can also then work on policies and what's working for you guys. Maybe it can work for us. What's not working for us, maybe it might work for you guys. So things like that. So that's our wish, those of us in data. That ain't very clean data.
Anybody else see a budding practice for data lawyers out there? I mean, it's going to become a big thing after a while. You know, you can see the billboards splashed out there. Have you been compromised because your data leaked?
I'd actually like to build on. Oh, thank you. I'd actually like to build on that last comment. So my team and I work a lot with these emerging techniques with exactly that, personally identifiable information. So I was wondering if our panelists could comment on where you see the biggest needs for some deep think about the moral, legal, and ethical implications of the use of these tools for especially personnel applications.
That is a huge question. And you've been working for it long enough, Julie. You know it's a huge question. So there's a certain amount of legislature that's built around the protection of human subjects. So we have Privacy Act, you have the Fifth Amendment for that matter. Yeah. We have all the different levels of review that have to go into using personal data. There's HIPAA Act to protect medical data. There's law enforcement protections. I think a lot of our progress in getting data combined and using data may be stalled just because we don't have an adequate understanding of how to protect it and how that protection needs to go up as it gets aggregated. I think we have a lot of people who are scared of the all the different concerns we have with cyber, and it just gets ratcheted up a notch when it's PII, just because that information is near and dear to us, and we know that people could use that to do various nefarious things. I think that's something that we need to put a lot of scrutiny into. We need to study how exactly to protect it, both legally, technically, and ethically. You know, we're collecting this information for certain purposes. Should we be collecting it? How long should it be stored? And should it ever be associated with a person's actual unique identifying information? It's something we've talked about, but I think it's something that a lot of people are wondering about, and I've not seen any clear answers or ways forward on how to best tackle this. So I welcome your suggestions.
Absolutely. So for us, I think one way to try to approach this is actually bring folks who are very knowledgeable about the data and folks, the policy and the legal, the decision makers, the stakeholders, the legal folks in and say, because we deal a lot with like the privacy office at Homeland Security and folks, the first answer out of their mouth is no, you can't provide that information, because we get a lot of FOIA requests too in our group. I think getting the two groups talking and seeing what is it that we can provide to answer the question. I think, yes, there are personal identifiable information, but the most important, let's say you strip out the social security numbers or you strip out birth dates and the names. I think really what you want is just those data points. You don't necessarily need all the other identifiers. And if you take all the other identifiers and put it into a system, we all know that there are systems out there that can give people random identifiers. And then from that, you can probably provide the information. So I really think and I am not an attorney, so I always think like, well, of course you can use data. It's important to provide data. It's thinking how we can provide this rather than, no, you can't. Really.
Brian, you think we have time for one more question? Who's the lucky winner? Matt.
This is the row of the questioners. I'm Matt Goldberg. I'm also from IDA. I'm more questions for both of you, but I'm more familiar with DoD, and I know that there are a lot of restrictions as to what software you can install. And so the question really for both agencies is, to what degree is the kind of stuff you'd like to do organically hindered by an inability to get the permissions to install the software you think you need to do your job?
Considerably. That's the appeal of systems like the PDE and the Adventa workspace and AWS's Sandbox and other things that we're looking into. But the problem comes in if it's not a system that's DoD owned, then how much access are we giving anybody else to the data that we have within there? We've talked a little bit about the problems with ATOs, with authorities to operate. Starting to get any kind of new stuff without having a separate playground area to do your analysis is extraordinarily difficult. And we're finding ways to overcome these, but until we come up with some kind of way to get the process moving faster, but then we also have to balance it with security, we're going to be just inching along.
So if it's a DoD system, it takes 8 months to install Python. And if it's not a DoD system, it takes 8 months to get approved to send the data.
Something along those lines.
Maybe I'm being optimistic.
Like a year and 8 months.
Evelyn, we should give you the last word, if you like.
We have similar issues. For example, because we're 70% law enforcement, data we can't necessarily, unless our laptops or our machines are encrypted, because we're carrying around information about 240,000 DHS employees, including about the 40,000 that are in Marines, so in the Coast Guard, and it becomes very frustrating in that, because our leadership wants the information so fast, but we can't provide it because sometimes all the equipment on our machines make our machines run a lot slower. So, and then we have to spend a lot of monies on maintenance, because we have homegrown systems also. Similar to DoD, I don't want to know how long it takes for approvals. I hear of stories, and I try not to pay attention to those stories, but it's something probably like 8 months, a year plus to get certain approvals for certain equipment. And I think and that's something actually we're wrestling with right now, because we're trying to figure out if to save some budget dollars. We're trying to use, do we go with an outside vendor for something that a business analytics, a business intelligence tool that we've homegrown. And so then now we're at a standstill. But at the same time, the leadership still wants all the information. So, I mean, this is maybe a topic for a future discussion about how all this works. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a few notes for you. You survived to the end. Congratulations. First, let's thank our panelists, please.